as promised, let's further unpack, of course, that signing of the expropriation bill into law by President Cyril Ramaphosa yesterday, and welcome political analyst Dr. Ongama Mtimka. Doctor, we really appreciate your time today. Welcome. So the surprise announcement late in the afternoon yesterday has left many confused with mixed reactions from political parties. Let's first get your understanding of this bill and what it actually translates to in layman terms.
Good afternoon. So what I am finding is that this is an emotive issue which is highly manipulated by the political class from both ends in order to achieve their own political imperatives that have got nothing to do with the substance of what this act says. So, for example, on the part of those that are for expropriation, they create the impression that they've now come up with the instrument that's going to allow the state to have vast amounts of land immediately en masse and be able to distribute that land. Okay, that's one. Mm-hmm. On the other side, you have politicians who are opposed to it. They think that this instrument allows the state to displace vast amounts of people in a fashion that is similar to the old style forced removals or ethnic cleansing that we saw in South Africa and what we are saying in Palestine. There's nothing of the sort that this act creates. But politicians, both on the part of the ANC and at some point the economic freedom fighters, when first Parliament agreed to take this process, somebody tweeted, "I'm going to write to our ancestors and tell them the land has returned," which was a highly misleading statement. What this act does, in my view, it creates one of the instruments in which land can be acquired, but it is not going to be a mass displacement of any people. And by the way, expropriation has happened in South Africa. It did not target white people. It did not target black people. It simply targeted whoever occupied that land that was needed. So one of the examples, for example, is the Kucha IDZ when it was declared. Two things happened there that relate to moving people from land. One, a mass number of black people, I think they were called the Kucha 360, they were moved by negotiation and agreeable compensation, which they agreed to. And then who was left there was a company called Offit Enterprises that triggered an expropriation process, which was done, and the company appealed and it was refused. And now that company, I think it was white-owned because it was a farming enterprise. And in that instance, you see that there was no targeting with expropriation of a particular racial group in order to do historic injustice, which is what these politicians, both from the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, are manipulating public sentiment about. And I think it's wrong.
Very interesting views, Doctor, because those that are actually obviously opposed to the deal say that, the bill say that the goal was to amend Section 25 of the Act, and that would be where, of course, clarity on the outstanding disputes, like those who have still not been able to claim back their possessed land, as well as those issues of land that is still under, for example, under the monarch.
Yeah, so two things here. And by the way, regarding the monarchy, there's a section in the Act makes reference to lands that are where people are not titled, unregistered land, but legitimate claims, which means those people are under the protections for property owners. Yes. Those people are not, as a result of not having official title, left any more vulnerable than any person who owns property, who is protected even in this act. The act reaffirms the rights of South Africans and the spirit of Section 25. Now, with respect to Section 25, it already gives an instruction to the state to clarify the mechanisms under which expropriation may happen.
Yes.
And An expropriation bill and an expropriation act serves only to do that purpose, in my view. Notwithstanding how much the ANC would like it to seem like it's a mass access to vast amounts of land that can be distributed willy-nilly, or how much the DA wants to manipulate the process to create the impression that white people are going to lose lands and mass. There is no government in South Africa in the next 20 to 50 years that can do the forced removals that were done under apartheid. There's no government in South Africa that can do the ethnic cleansing that was done to administer white economic empowerment, or in a way similar to what we're seeing in Palestine, where people will just bomb neighborhoods and then say somebody else is going to occupy this land. It's not going to happen in South Africa. This act doesn't create that. Unless you have a leader who becomes a military leader and commands an army to do that, the instrument they would be using would be the instrument of war and violence, not this act.
Doctor, please explain what this means. An expropriating authority is therefore obliged to enter into negotiations with the owner of a property required for such purposes. An expropriating authority must also attempt to reach an agreement on the acquisition of the property before resorting to expropriation, except in circumstances where the right to use property temporarily is taken on an urgent basis in terms of a provision in the legislation.
Yeah, two things about that process of negotiation. And as I made reference to that Offit versus Guha case, negotiation had been undertaken there for a very long time. And then as only a last resort, stretching over many years, the expropriation process was evoked. And I think that's the same spirit here. When it comes to urgency is not something that can be arbitrarily determined. Urgency could be, we have a natural disaster and a road needs to be built that runs over a person's farm in order to save a situation, to salvage a situation. There's no water, and it's proven that the only land in which bulk services can be built is this specific land. So the point I'm making is that doesn't give any expropriating authority, which may be I suspect a municipality, provincial government, or national, it doesn't give them, or their entities, it doesn't give them any right to arbitrarily create or precipitate an emergency as a backdrop to acting arbitrarily to expropriate people's land.
Doctor, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I had so many things to ask you, but unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. And thank you so much for explaining this in the simplest terms that you've made it for us. Dr. Ongama Mtimka is a political analyst there weighing in on an expropriation bill that has now sent a lot of confusion and a lot of reaction amongst political parties, particularly those that were at the forefront of this expropriation bill being signed into law in Parliament, actually saying it's an ineffective piece of legislation.